it's a beautiful day out today. I should be gardening, but I almost feel like my gardening days are over. I'd much rather be quilting with you in the studio. Today, I have loaded, as you saw in the intro, Petal Power for spring. It's going to be a small quilt, so I'm going to try and more thoroughly show the steps of loading the design and doing each row. Hopefully I will do that very proficiently today. As you can see behind me, I have the Petal Power for the Christmas version, and that one has been quilted. It does have its binding, and it even has a sleeve. And one of these days, I'm going to show you how I make a magic sleeve. I had the very good fortune of working with a very intelligent woman in my early quilting days, and she had the perfect trick for doing a sleeve so that it accommodated the size of the pole or rod that you use to hang it. So one of these days, I'm going to put that on my list of things to show you, but it's going to be a secret. So when I show that video, make sure you invite everybody, because I won't do it twice. Anyway, I digress. We have the quilt loaded. I'm just going to be using a pure white isocord thread for the top stitching. The background of the quilt is primarily white, and I used a pink cape border, inner border, outer border. It matched a lot of the cape that was already in the applique. So the background is the leftover yellow that I did for the Hummingbird Garden quilt, but oddly, because of the way the studio works, this quilt will be shown first, and Hummingbird Garden won't be for a few more months because those recordings are in the can but not ready to show yet. So what I'm going to do is reposition the camera so we could get the IQ in there and the machine, and we're going to, well, the machine is on but the IQ isn't. So I'll show you how that loads up, and then we'll get started loading the design. I haven't picked one out yet. It will be probably something that looks like wind or air or clouds or something like that, because Petal Power is a bicycle streaming its way through spring, so you want to have the feeling of motion there. So it'll be something like that. I didn't go and pick out something specific downloaded for this because I know I've got so many designs on the IQ already. So let's go ahead and get the camera moved, and we'll get zipping or pedaling right through this process. This is what the screen looks like on the IQ tablet when it's off. And this is the turn on process. I just hit the power button, and you'll see this is a Surface tablet with the IQ program loaded onto it. I wouldn't do anything else on this tablet but run the IQ, so there's nothing else loaded on here. It does have all of the designs, but this is its opening sequence. And you'll see the screen will come up, and then it will request to be brought to the front of the machine and to the center. It's going to do that in less than a second, and it will start beeping. That's all there is to the startup process of this program. So next thing I'm going to do is hit Design Sew Quilt, and I need to grab my tape measure because I forgot to measure. So the first thing we always do whenever I start to Design Sew Quilt, I need to have the machine in its start position, and the start position is, in this case, all the way to the back and all the way to the left of the quilt. And I always start about an inch off, so I'm going to add an inch for the left and an inch for the right on both sides of the quilt to my width, and I'm going to add a little bit of length because I can always make an adjustment at the bottom. And so let's see, this quilt is actually 47, so I'm going to say it's 49, and I'm going to make it 34. So I'm going to Design Sew Quilt. Well, first I want to make sure the camera's on it. I always start coughing when I'm talking by myself in here. First thing is design so quilt, start new. I have a work in progress. Do I want to replace it? Yes, I do. Do I want to erase the work that I previously had or save the work in a progress catalog? I just want to erase it because I'm finished with that quilt. The project that I worked on the last time was 2 hours and 12 minutes. I was only actually stitching for an hour. Do I want to reset that? Yes, I do. Today we're going to be working with the Pantograph, and I'm going to enter the rectangle size manually. The reason I'm going to do that because if I were going to mark on the quilt or trace the quilt, there's not enough room for the machine to move to get all of it in. So I have to enter the rectangle manually. And the quilt was 47, but I'm adding 2 inches, so I'm going to say 49 inches wide. And what did I say, how long it was? 32, I'm going to say 34 inches long, because this is a horizontal, no, it's a, yeah, horizontal quilt, it's not portrait. So I can go ahead and hit finished, and you're going to see the visual representation of that quilt on the screen. So now I can hit finished, and I can go ahead and load a pattern. So I could look first in my downloads and see what I have here. See if there's anything. Basic Swirl's nice. That's a 6-inch high design. I can see how that looks. I could change the gap. All I did was touch gap, and I'm sliding my finger at a diagonal until I get the design to about the size, well, the gap to the size I want it. So I'm happy with that much space in between each row, but my row height now is 12 inches and the pattern height is 17 inches. I know that the actual design was intended to be 6 inches because I add that to the name of my designs now. I don't know all of the designers, so I don't always know what they were thinking or planning when they had a design. So when I upload a design onto the tablet, I always eliminate the inventory control number, which Urban Elements adds at the beginning. I eliminate that, but I add the height of the design at the back end so I can see that when I upload it. So I know that my pattern height is showing at 17.647. I need to decrease that. I could do that just by running my finger across, and it said it was a 6-inch design. So if I go all the way down to 6, here I am at 6.005. That's how many rows I'll have to sew of this. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 full rows, 2 partial rows. The thing that you need to pay attention to though is the row height is highlighted in red. It says 4.084, but it's the pattern height that I'm going for. The pattern height is 6.005, and I know the designer, Jamie Wallen from Quilters Apothecary, had originally designed this pantograph to be 6 inches high, and so that is the actual visual representation of that now. The pattern height is what I'm looking for. So I could hit finished, and I'm just going to look real quick. And I could hit finish and do actual height, but I could see that the design is going to be about that big. I think that's going to be good. I have enough time to do that, so I'm going to hit finished. When it goes off of the edge of the quilt, the 2 sides, the program wants to know if I want continuous transition type. So when it goes off and the design has to come back on, it's going to sew a straight line down on either side. I'm okay with that in this case because it's going to be off of the machine, off of the quilt rather, and I can just trim that off. So I like the continuous type. I accept that. It's confirming that I want to do that, and I do want to do that. So this is the quilt now. I can hit sew quilt, and I could sequence the whole thing at once, but I'm just going to go ahead and select what we're going to do first, which are basically just little half circles all the way across the top edge of this quilt. And so I can hit continue, sew quilt, and it just took a single stitch to pull up the bobbin thread, and I'm ready to sew. Again, I will say that my bobbin thread and my top thread are both the same. They're both isocord 40 weight, and they're both well, the top is white and the bottom is a light yellow, so I'm not going to have any tension issues. So I'm going to go ahead, it's asking to make sure the machine is on manual, which it is, and I'll hit start. And it's just going to go across and sew these little half circles all the way across the top, and then we can get to the first full row. This is what the screen looks like after the first row. Now, I did not use Panto's sequencing assistance, which would have sequenced the whole quilt. I could have easily done that. But what I'm going to do instead, I'm going to go ahead and pull up the thread and trim that off. I don't necessarily have to trim it, but I do have to pull the needle up. My machine, for some reason, it doesn't always finish with the needle up. I probably could change the programming to get it to do that, but I haven't. So I'm going to hit sew quilt again. It's going to show us in green, which you may not be able to see yet because there's so few of them, what I've already sewn. So it's asking me to select the next pattern. So I'll do the next row, and I'm going to swap the end points just because we're already over here, and hit continue. Continuous sewing, sew quilt. And now what I'm going to do is hit restart, and the restart for row 2 is a little box right here. It says S2. That means start 2. E1 was the end of the first row. S2 is the start of the second row. And also, it's very important because I've had this trip me up in the beginning. Whenever you're going to restart the machine, when you hit the restart button, it really doesn't know if you're sewing left to right or right to left, top to bottom or bottom to top. There's a little circle with the arrow pointing in the way that it's going to go. And if you're not paying attention, you could have that arrow going back in the direction that you've already sewn. You can make it sew back upon itself just by not paying attention to that arrow. So that's really important information. So I've got it at my start 2. I have the arrow pointing in the direction that I actually want to sew, and it's done. It has not done its first stitch yet, so I'll hit OK. It just did its single stitch, so I could pull up the bobbin thread, and I'm going to go ahead and get my scissors in my hand. I have it on manual, and I'm going to hit start. If you could see, it's stitched off the edge of the quilt about 1.25 inches. And that's because I enlarged the size of the quilt bigger than what it needs to be. I would rather have it sew off a little bit and waste a little bit of batting and background fabric where I could trim it off later than have it be sewing on the edge of the quilt and do that continuous line where I don't want it. So that is intentional. You can adjust that once you have the quilt loaded, but if the top is at any kind of an angle, you want to make sure that it is completely stitched rather than have it doing its continuous line on the edge there. So now I'm on my first full row. Well, there's a little bit of a cutoff, But this particular row is only going to take a little over 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes. So you can see that this is kind of a small design at 6 inches, but each row is only going to take 6 or 7 minutes, so it won't take very long to finish this quilt at all. You can see here at this point that it is sewing off this portion of the design off the quilt. And again, this is intentional because if the quilt top shifts at all, I want to make sure it's completely covered with the design. And I would rather have this margin of error off the quilt than on. This is all going to get trimmed off anyway. And so this is exactly how I want it to look. Now I'm just going to repeat this process because I still have plenty of room to sew additional designs left. I probably will only have to roll this quilt up once. So I'm going to go ahead and hit sew quilt again just as I did previously. I am going to go ahead and raise the needle up. You can see now hopefully that the very top partial row is green, and then the next row down is green. And they're actually two very slightly different colors of green, so you can see the alternating rows that you've previously sewn. The unsewn portion remains that kind of navy blue color. So I'm going to go ahead and it says select the next pattern to quilt. So I'm going to do the next one. Start 3 is going to be on the left hand side, and that's exactly where I want it. So I'm going to go ahead and hit continue. Continuous sewing and sew quilt. My machine just had a little bit of a spaz, but I'm not going to stop the camera because I want to show you how to adjust this. My start 3 is here. I am going to have to rethread the needle, so I'm going to have to make sure that my hopping foot is up. Alright, I'm done with it. I'm going to hit start. I have basted the edges of the quilt. So I don't have to worry about the top getting folded over on itself. And again, we are less than 3 minutes for this particular row. We're almost at the end of the 3 minutes. We have less than a half of a minute. This is officially the end of the very first row. We had the very tiny partial row and then another kind of partial row. This is the actual first one. It gives you a complete design. And it says I have a thread break, which is entirely possible. I will check that and then we'll restart when I get this little bit finished. And we're going to start number 4. You can barely see here from where you're at where the thread broke. It broke or stopped stitching because I ran out of bobbin thread. So I hit the restart button, and this is the same exact step that I take when I am starting a row, I hit the restart button, but I'm just going to go ahead and drop the needle about 1/4 of an inch back from where the thread stopped sewing, and I'm going to take 2 stitches there. Now I'm going to move the camera so you can see the screen. This is exactly where I want you to see. The machine stitched out all the places that are in red, but it stitched out this last portion with no stitching because the bobbin had run out. So here's where I am right now, where my thread broke. My needle is pointing in the right direction. If it was pointing back that way, it would be stitching in reverse. It's stitching in the way I want to go. So when I hit OK, all of this red that it thinks has been stitched out is going to convert to green, which means it knows it needs to restitch that. So it just did it. This crosshairs are where my needle is at. It's where it is in the program. So I'm going to go ahead and move my little tails out of the way and hit start. And the stitching restarted exactly where the thread had broke, and it's going to go ahead and stitch off of the screen, off of the edge of the quilt, and then we can get on to the row number 4. I am going to have to reload the bobbin. Sometimes if I overload the bobbin too much, it makes the thread break for some unknown reason. So I will. Okay, we're a little bit further back, so you're not going to be able to see the screen as close. But we're going to be doing the same thing over and over again at this point. I first raised up the needle and the presser foot. I'm going to hit sew quilt. It shows me in green that I've done row 1, 2, and 3. So it's asking me to select the next pattern. I'm going to select the next one down. Swap the ends so that it can start 4 over on this side where it's already at. And hit continue, and I'm going to hit continue and stop. Now I'm going to restart and go down to the start 4 position. This is row 4. And I know my arrow's going in the correct direction, the little red arrows, so I'm okay. It's going to take 1 stitch and let me pull up the bobbin thread. So I have it on manual. I can hit start. And it's got 3.5 minutes for this row, which apparently is what all of them have been. I'm going to go ahead and let it stitch out, and then we'll move on to row 5. We have sewn row 5 off. It ended nicely. We still have room to do another row before rolling up the quilt. Might even be able to do 2 more rows. Keep in mind that I do not have on my ruler base right now, so that is giving me another 4 inches. So it's asking me to touch a quilt to see its properties, to touch the pattern. I don't need to do that. I just need to sew quilt. When I hit sew quilt, you can see again the alternating shades of green of all the rows that I've already sewn. So I'm going to go ahead and raise my needle and my presser foot. I'm going to select the next row to quilt and hit continue. I'm going to hit continuous sewing as we have been doing and sew quilt. If it starts to go backwards, I'm going to pause it and hit restart again. So I'm going to hit sew quilt, and again for some reason it's going back. So I'll hit restart and OK, and I'm going to restart it down here at row 5. Start 5, I have the arrow going in the correct position. Hit OK. It took a single stitch to bring up my bobbin thread. But it didn't actually bring up the bobbin thread, so I'll do it again. And for some reason it's not pulling up the bobbin thread, so I'm just going to check the bobbin. Make sure the thread is loaded in the bobbin correctly. Okay, make sure I don't have a knot. Back to start 5. My bobbin thread came up this time. I'm going to hit start, and here we are at row 5. You can see with the light shining here, the beautiful dimension and motion we're getting from that Basic Swirl pattern by Jamie. And we have another 3 minutes to get across this row. I'm going to guess we could do one more row before rolling the quilt up, but we'll be able to test that when we get to the other end. The white thread I think is a pretty good choice because it's not overpowering the quilting design, the piece pattern, or the background. There's enough brightness and white in the applique shapes that it really is just blending in. First thing I'm going to do is raise the needle and the presser foot. In this case I am going to go ahead and bring up the bobbin thread and clip it because I want to be able to test how much space I have left to do another row. So I'm going to go ahead and hit sew quilt as if I were going to do the other row. It's going to show me what I've sewn and what I have left to sew, but it also has the crossbar, the crosshair, which shows me the needle position on the quilt. So I'm going to take the head of the machine and move it all the way forward until I hit the bar. And it shows that I don't have enough space to do the next row. I would have an obstruction notice. So now I know that I have to go ahead and roll the quilt up to do the next portion of the quilt. I think I'll be able to do the whole next of it, but I may have to roll it twice. So what I'm going to do is put the crosshair on where the top of the next row would be. I'm just going to choose one of the swirls and have the crosshair right there. I want to increase the, so you can really see that. So I hope you can see this without distortion. The crosshair on the tablet is where my needle is. I'm going to put that crosshair at the very top edge of the next row that I need to sew, which is the top of that blue swirl. So once I have it there, I'm going to drop the needle down, and now I'm going to roll the quilt with the needle in the quilt until I hit the machine with the back bar, and then I'm going to bring it forward just a little bit. But that way I know I have enough row behind the design to sew the top, and it will give me a place to use as my reference point. Because of the size of this quilt was small, I did not attach the top to a leader. It's just floating, as they say. So I'm going to go ahead and roll the quilt back. I'm going to keep going until the head of the machine almost hits the back bar, the take-up bar. And then I'm going to go ahead and refluff the front. But now I know that I have enough space to quilt the next row of the design, so I can go ahead and hit realignment after I get this done. But I'm going to go ahead and get this straightened out first, and then we can get to stitching the next couple rows. Okay, I've rolled the quilt up using that guidance point as my reference. I know that the needle's still in the quilt, so I can go ahead and release the needle, but first I'm going to go back and realign. So I know how many rows I've sewn, and even if I make a mistake, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I don't think I did 7 or 8 yet. But I'm going to go ahead and realign to the top of that row. The needle is already where it was, so I'm going to hit, I touch my reference point and hit continue, and now I'm going to hit sew quilt, and it shows you how many rows I have left to do. So I can go ahead and hit sew quilt, I hit stop and restart. Actually, I have to tell it to sew the next row. So I want to go back, sew quilt. I want to sew this one next, swapping the edge. And I'm going to take it to start 6. Continuous sewing. We're almost at start 6 now. There's my start 6. The arrow's going in the right direction, so I'm going to hit OK. It just did a single stitch. Now I have my needle thread pulled, the bobbin thread pulled up. I'm still on manual. I'll hit start. After I got to the end of row 6, I went ahead and basted the 2 sides and the bottom of the quilt, so I don't have to worry about the hopping foot getting caught underneath the quilt and getting tied up, knotting itself, which is always a disaster. So I've utilized that restart button again to get me to the start of row 7, which is where I'm at. My little red arrow is pointing in the correct direction, so I know I'm not going to be sewing backwards. I'm going to be sewing forward, and I'm not going to worry about pulling up the thread because I didn't cut it from the last time. So all I have to do is hit OK. I do have the machine back on manual, so I'm going to hit the start button, and 3.7 is the actual time for each row, 3.7 minutes. So I'm on the next row. It looks like maybe I have, after this, a full row and a partial row, but it's almost done. We're really down to the bottom. So the restart button is what I use to start the rows when I haven't done the panto sequencing. The realign is what I use when the quilt has to be rolled up and you need to let the software know where the quilt is and what you've stitched already. And then there's the realign button. The realign I'll show you at the very end. I told you I made the quilt design longer than it needs to be, so when we get to the bottom, rather than having that stitch out, I will snap the line right to the needle position using the realign button, and that way we won't be stitching what we don't need to. Okay, let's see where we are. I pulled up my needle. I'm going to hit Sew Quilt, which will illustrate how many rows we have done so far. So I'm going to select row 8. I'm going to swap the end points and hit Continue. It's still going to, for some reason, go to the other side, but I'm going to hit Pause. And I'm going to go ahead and restart it down on row 8, making sure the arrow is going in the correct position. It's asking me to make sure the machine's on manual, which it is. I'll hit start. And we're off and running on row 8. I think row 8 is pretty much going to fill out most of the bottom. We'll still have a little bit of a partial, but we'll get that partial row done, and I'll also show you how to use that readjust button, readjust, to bring up or reduce the extra quilting on the bottom edge, and I'll show you that as I do it. Okay, we are going to go ahead and pull the needle up, and I'm going to select Sew Quilt again. It's going to show that I have a full row and a partial row according to the program. But as far as the quilt is concerned, I may not have that much. So I'm going to go ahead and select the next row to quilt and hit Continue, Continuous Sewing. I'm going to select Sew Quilt, but I'm going to hit Pause right away. And you'll see I have 3 buttons here: Adjust, Realign, and Restart. Restart I use all the time. It's the most common button. That's what I use whenever I'm starting at the two edges, or if I have a bobbin run out or the thread breaks, I use that. Realign is when I roll the quilt up and I need to let the program know that I've rolled the quilt up, and it helps me realign the pattern with the program. Adjust is when I need to make an actual adjustment to the quilting design. In my case, I made it longer than it needs to be, and rather than waste the fabric and the thread, I'm going to make that adjustment now because that's where I'm down to that area. So I can hit adjust, and you can see again my crosshairs here. What I'm going to do is bring the needle down to the very bottom of the quilt. The needle right now and the presser foot are touching the very edge of the bottom of the quilt. So it's asking me to touch a dash line and drag it to the desired position. The crosshairs go all the way vertical and horizontal, so I can see where the bottom, where the needle is right now. So I'm going to touch this bottom dotted line and bring it up to where the needle is. And when I hit finished, it's going to eliminate all of the stitching that it would have done below that. So now I'm going to go to my start 8 position. I'm going to hit restart. I have the crosshairs at my S9, my start 9 position. I shouldn't have to pull up my thread because I didn't cut it, but I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. I'm still on manual, so I'm going to hit OK and start. And you'll be able to see now that it's not really going to sew much at all beyond the bottom of my quilt, because I've adjusted how long the quilting pattern needs to be, and I've given it a new reference point, and so it won't waste time stitching. You'll see it's going to sew right to the edge and then go back on the quilt. I have basted the edge, the bottom on this all the way around, so I don't have to worry about the quilt getting caught up in the hopping foot. So that greatly reduced the amount of time it's going to have to sew across. So by the time I get to the right hand side, this quilt will be finished. Well, that brings me to the end. I tried to give you a little bit of a close-up of the stitching. This particular digital design or paper design is called Basic Swirl, and it's by Jamie Wallen and Patricia Ritter. I think they co-designed, and it will be found under Quilters Apothecary. If you use the shop by or subcategories to filter out a specific designer, that's how you would find a specific thing. But you could just also type in Basic Swirl, and I'm pretty sure this will come up right in the search engine at Urban Elements. So it was just a 6-inch design, so we did have to go about 8 passes on here, but I only had to roll the quilt up once because it was so small, because most of it fit inside the design space of my machine. So I used a really bright yellow, basically because there is yellow in the front, so I felt like I could get away with that. But also I had ordered wide backing for another quilt, the Hummingbird Garden, and this was the leftover piece, and so I like to utilize pieces that way both of those will match the back anyway here in the studio. So it be stitched out really beautifully. I used white isocord thread in the top, and I used light yellow in the back, and so all I have left to do is go ahead and make a binding. And I don't know, I very well might use that yellow. I have more of that yellow backing, so I might use that as the binding. It would certainly be the sleeve, but I may choose a different color. I may go with the green or this hot pink if I find something, so we'll have to wait and see. But once I get that bound and a sleeve on it, then I can go ahead and change that quilt out for the spring version. I have the winter version here. There are 2 other ones in this collection. They were designed for the seasons, so there are 4 of them. So that's it for today. I'm going to go ahead and get this video edited and get it ready to pop up this weekend, because I am running close to the gate again. And this week I went shopping at one of my local quilt shops, and I bought background fabric to do 12 different projects, so I could get them all ready to go. Sometimes it's just a matter of getting all my ducks in a row as to what gets quilted or not, what project I work on. I try and work on them as per season, but that doesn't always work. So I have those fabrics in the washing machine. I like to wash everything. Unless it's silk. I don't wash silk. And I don't wash these kits either. But I wash everything else. So they're in the washer. They'll be going in the dryer next. And hopefully we'll have a run where I can get several videos made at once, because I need to get back ahead a little bit. Anyway, thanks for stopping by the studio. We really do appreciate it when you engage with the videos. So if you like a video, it's really great if you hit the thumbs up or the like button. It's amazing if you share a video, either specifically with somebody you know might like it, or just in general to your community. If you tag somebody who might like a particular theme that we're working on that day, that's amazing. If you like us on Facebook, you will get notifications when we do sales and videos, which I think that's really helpful. Any of the ones you're not interested in, you just don't have to read. And if you subscribe on YouTube, that's really amazing also. It helps increase the algorithm work so that more people get to see the video, or if you share it, more people get to see the video, and you're helping people like the same things you like, which I think is great. So we really appreciate all of those things, especially the nice comments. It just makes me feel good. So thanks for stopping by the studio today, and again, we'll see you next time here back in the Urban Elementz studio. And cut. That's a wrap.